Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 News. Adrian Newey is today giving a remarkable insight to his new Aston Martin AMR26, revealing there are several features he is extremely pleased with about this car, but also says the concept in general is not a particularly extreme one, despite what it appears to be compared to rivals. Newey therefore thinks there is a lot more to come, and not just thinks, but actually will deliver. Newey says that by Bahrain, the test upcoming, and then by Melbourne, the car will be very different to what it is today, and then different again towards the end of the season. There is a more radical version of this AMR26 yet to be unveiled, and Newey clearly has a bit of a grin on his face. But I want to throw to your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. Just before we start, today's main story on Newey is really an evolution of a story that emerged a couple of days ago. I actually made a video on it and then just forgot to publish it on YouTube. I left it unlisted. I have put it up on Spotify, and I was going to publish it anyway, but then I thought, you know what, today's a good opportunity to really just look at some of those things again in a bit more detail. So I'm going to cover some of the same ground again. You guys probably haven't seen the other video. If you do want to watch the original one, you guys can find it in full video form on Spotify. And for those that are watching this on Spotify, just know that I'll probably talk about some things that you saw me talk about a couple of days back. But you not talk about this, because this is the Williams. This is a brand new car, and well, this isn't the car, this is just livery. A few interesting features on this new livery that they've revealed. Firstly, I think you'll notice that it's Barclays. So they're no longer with Santander. They've been a Carlos Sainz sponsor for a long time. They were with Ferrari, then with Williams when Sainz went to Williams. No longer the case. It is now Barclays, their banking partner. The colour does fit somewhat better, I would suggest. Do we like it on the side pod? I think from some angles I don't mind it. I will say you look up and down the grid this year, the cars are pretty distinct. There's a lot of colour on these liveries, at least the ones that they've shown us right now, which you'd expect will be the real liveries when they hit the track in Melbourne, but I guess we shall see. This is what they've come up with though. This is what the car will look like from a livery perspective. Of course, the actual machine itself will look very different to this because there is no aerodynamic development done on this show version. This is another angle of the Williams as well. So, yeah, I think it looks perfectly reasonable. I kind of like it. I think up and down the grid, we don't see the Aston Martin yet, but we know what colour that's going to be. It's going to be a pretty colourful grid this year, all things considered. Now, the other interesting development we did discuss yesterday, that Mercedes revealed their technical documentation that put their car at 772 kilograms. Now, according to the Williams one, theirs is 772.4 kilograms. Now, the minimum weight limit is 768, but as we discussed yesterday, it's basically 770. Now, if they are really only a couple of kilos above the minimum weight, that is an incredible achievement, you would argue, given that they weren't even there in Barcelona, and it raised major questions. Why weren't they ready for Barcelona when their car is seemingly at a decent weight? Now, James Vowles the other day said, nobody even knows the weight of the car. So what's going on with these minimum weights or these weight figures being revealed in these technical documentations? Even if James Vowles said a few days ago that Williams haven't put the car together yet, so they don't know the numbers. But it's like, well, surely you just add up the numbers of the parts that haven't been put in the car yet, and then you get the total. So I'm not really sure. But also the big rumour was that they were way behind, they were super delayed, and they were massively overweight because they'd failed to pass the crash test and all this, and that's why they were struggling to get down to the weight limit. So if they're only 2 kilos, 2, 3, 4 kilos over, that's not much. Maybe there's a tenth in that a lap, but it's nothing crazy. It's nothing like we saw at the start of 2022 when the cars and the teams are really struggling. There was a feeling that this year might be even worse than 2022 in terms of the teams struggling to get down to the limit, but seemingly not. But is there more to this, right? Because the guys at Soy Motor, they were talking about it, and they said that they wish the Williams was only 20 kilograms overweight, implying that it's more. Some sources say that it's 20, 30 kilograms over the weight limit. We've now got these technical sheets saying it's like 2. So what's right? It doesn't... If Williams really are that close, it would be a big surprise to me, given everything that's happened there recently, and seemingly some journalists are of a similar opinion. So introduce your thoughts on that in the comments below. The other Williams note is that they are using pull rod front suspension. Most teams, maybe all teams, go and push rod at the rear. But at the front, it's a pull rod configuration for Williams, for Cadillac and for Alpine, which is particularly interesting just because Red Bull, Mercedes and Adrian Newey and Aston Martin Red Bull have used pull rod at the front for some time. That was a Newey-led inspiration. Newey's Aston Martin and the Red Bull are both now on push rod for this generation, as are Mercedes, as are Ferrari. So, yes, there may not be much in it. From a mechanical perspective, it doesn't appear there is much in it. We understand that aerodynamically, push rod can be preferable in this generation. I guess we'll find out. This is Jack Doohan, and he will be officially the reserve driver for Haas for the 2026 season. I think it was rumoured a little while ago, and now, well, it is officially true as of today. The other couple of things I wanted to get into, as I say, I did mention these in the video that I never published, but just to quickly run through some of the highlights here. Christian Horner has made it pretty clear that he wants to come back. He says he's got unfinished business in Formula 1, but he only wants to come back to a team that's capable. The team that feels most likely as it stands is Alpine, because they've got rid of their own power unit. They're now running on Mercedes. They look like if any team is close to selling up or deciding to allow investment or whatever, does it really make much sense for Renault to have a Renault Formula 1 project that they don't have confidence in their engine division? It's not really a great look. But Alpine also do know how to build a car aerodynamically. Their team has done a reasonably good job of that in recent seasons. There is maybe a feeling that with a different, man at the helm, they could make some real progress. And even this season, Alpine are a real team to watch because they've had a load of development time, more so than anybody else, more CFD time, more wind tunnel time because they were last in the championship. So surely you're expecting a pretty aerodynamically advanced car with some very interesting ideas. And given Williams' poor start to the season, right now I'm expecting Williams to be the fourth fastest Mercedes-powered team and Alpine to be ahead of them. How Alpine will compete with Mercedes and McLaren, if at all, that's a different question. But what is interesting is that DRS traditionally has looked like this. So this is your DRS flap, and it is actuated upwards. It's pulled upwards when the DRS flap is opened. However, and as a result of that, in this generation, the teams have typically taken a similar approach, but you don't actually have to do that. So you can see that most other teams here on the left-hand side, they actuate the upper two elements up. So Active Aero is now what it's called, but it is still in effect a drag reduction system that we have on these cars. And because they've used all the technology in recent years to actuate the DRS like this, that's what every team has shown us in Barcelona, apart from one. This is the Alpine rear wing that instead of the top two elements being actuated upwards, instead they move down. So the rear wing flattens kind of in a very similar way to the front wing does, which is interesting. Is this better or worse? It may just be different, but it's more elegant. I will say that. It's definitely more elegant, and I think there is an argument that other teams may look to do something similar at some point. Of course, it's not about elegance, it's about if it's fast, but I thought it was interesting that Alpine have gone for this approach, which is, maybe in hindsight looks very pretty and looks like a really nice solution, but the other teams haven't approached it in that way yet. You can see this exact thing on the Ferrari here. The other note I wanted to make on this Ferrari is that, as you can see, this is the testing at Fiorano, they did the little shakedown. The rear wing actuates before the front wing does. So you can see that there's about, a period, maybe a quarter of a second, half a second or whatever, when the rear wing is open and the front wing isn't open quite yet before it moves into straight line mode, as they're calling it. Now, this is interesting what it means for the regulations, because clearly, I believe this is intentional from Ferrari to have this offset. There are potential advantages to the offset in, let's say you were going into a corner. You might want the, the front wing to be up a little bit earlier so you have a bit more front-end grip or something. Depends on the balance features of the car. But it's interesting, what I find fascinating here is that it doesn't seem that it's mandated that they must move at exactly the same time, because otherwise Ferrari wouldn't do this. It seems like a deliberate choice as to when they activate the active aerodynamics. It does seem like some sort of delay is allowed, which makes you wonder, would a bigger delay be possible? Could they just open the rear wing if they wanted to and not the front? What would be the implications of something? Not like that would be massively beneficial, but it's interesting that there could be a lot of room for manoeuvre in the regulations here, let's just put it that way. And as a result of that, high top speeds are absolutely here to stay. Craig Slater reported the top speed for the Mercedes was 347 kph last year in qualifying. we were talking 330 maybe in Barcelona. So we're 20 kph on the straight faster than that, which is a big deal. Aston Martin never hit anywhere near those numbers because they were running their electrical unit very conservatively, as we understand. The other speak of the, obviously they didn't get much time to test the car really anyway, they just wanted to make sure that it was all sunshine and rainbows, at least from a reliability perspective, which to a certain extent it was after the Thursday where Stroll did about 4 laps. But Toto Wolff says Ferrari and Red Bull managed their energy differently. It's not better and it's not worse, it's just different. I thought it was an interesting perspective here. Mercedes must feel like they gained some advantage from doing it their way. But Toto says it was interesting to see how Ferrari and Red Bull managed energy in Barcelona. Now, this is the other thing. They call it a shakedown. It's like, well, the teams are all there, looking at the GPS data, trying to figure out what fuel loads the other teams are on, trying to use the data they have available to figure out what electrical deployment the other teams are doing, right? Like, this is, F1 is back. It wasn't worse, it wasn't better, it was different. So I think learning by watching others, learning from the miles they cover, we mapped out our electrical management very differently to they did. So, look, the most skilled in the car and from an engineering perspective will win. Where do Aston Martin sit in this conversation? Well, we're about to get into it. The other update is that Hamilton will reportedly continue working with Angela Cullen. Shouldn't be a massive surprise, but obviously she was back with his team last year at Ferrari after a couple of years away after some confusing state of affairs at Mercedes, let's just say, in his final couple of years with that team that could well be back on top this year. George Russell is the title favourite, but he does say this: you can't discount what you've seen from Aston Martin. What Adrian has done looks pretty spectacular. Now, look, it's not all about Adrian Newey, but I think you can definitely see his fingerprints pretty much all over the car that we saw the other day. A very different design to what anyone else has come up with. Craig Scarborough said it looks like it's already 2027's car, which is quite high praise. Does it work? That's a different question. But what's kind of scary maybe about this from the Newey perspective is that he says, yeah, that car's fine, but it's nothing special, really. The real car you want to wait for is when we turn up to Melbourne, and certainly by the end of the season in Abu Dhabi. This was that machine they rolled out of the garage with. Of course, there's been lots of talk about it, especially these side pods, the cooling louvres at the back, the wishbone at the rear connecting to these pylons, and a number of other very interesting aerodynamic features. Also, just the packaging in general at the rear of the car is very tight, and Adrian Newey, it seems, as he very much likes to make the packaging as tight as possible, is extremely proud of the achievement they've made there. But the other day there was this rumour that there is a more extreme radical evolution of the car that's turning up for Bahrain and then will turn up for Melbourne beyond that as well. Apparently Newey as well elected not to do the 200k additional running in the shakedown in Barcelona because they thought they could run an extra day. They were going to do a filming day basically on the Saturday and take an extra 200k of running. But apparently Newey said, we don't need to do that. And that's an interesting time. Maybe he wants to save that filming day for when they have the more advanced version of the car, so they can get some proper running in. Maybe they needed to do it if on Friday they had reliability issues again and they needed to get things resolved and just make sure that they could do some running and get some information. But their Friday was relatively clean. They did, 60, 65 laps or so. They will get a decent amount of information from that for sure. And there's a radical evolution coming soon. And this is what Adrian Newey has to say on it today in quite some detail. Now, this is a very long interview that they sit down with Aston Martin and do. The top line of the article, by the way, is called Undercut. Adrian Newey wants you to keep an open mind, which is, I know that some Aston Martin Alonso fans were reading that thinking, oh, it's a bit concerning. What does he mean keep an open mind? That sounds like the car's terrible, right? But it doesn't appear that is quite the case. So, yes, there's a lot of things that he mentions here. There's a few key quotes that I'll mention for you guys. Feel free to read at your own leisure. I'll never look at any of my designs as aggressive. I just get on with things and pursue what we feel is the right direction. The direction we've taken could certainly be interpreted as aggressive. It's got quite a few features that have not necessarily been done before. Does that make it aggressive? Possibly, possibly not. So you can see Newey is quite proud of some of these features on this car, and you'll get that as we go through this. It's got quite a few features that haven't been done before. Whether it's aggressive or not, that's a different question. I think what Newey is kind of implying here is that we could be more aggressive, and potentially we will be. Which part of the car are you most satisfied with? He's happy with it all, or like at least how it works closely together. This I thought was a nice quote. Yes, the car is tightly packaged, much more tightly packaged than I believe has been attempted at Aston Martin before. Adrian can't hide his grin this time, so, he's pretty happy with that. He obviously talks about the relationship internally at the team and all that type of stuff as well. He talks about a number of other things. We've attempted to build something that we hope will have quite a lot of development potential. What you want to try and avoid is a car that comes out quite optimized within its window, but lacks a lot of development potential. We've tried to do the opposite, which is why we've really focused on the fundamentals, put our effort into those, knowing that some of the appendages, the wings, the bodywork and things that can be changed in the season will hopefully have development potentials. This is very interesting. It's kind of the feeling about Ferrari in 2022. They came out the box with a pretty nice car, but it didn't have the ultimate ceiling of the Red Bull concept. That's what held them back long term, even taking the technical directive 39 or whatever it was called to one side. Adrian's trying a similar thing here with this Aston Martin, and is willing to potentially accept a weaker start of the season to have a stronger conclusion, and with the opportunity to massively upgrade and change their car as the season goes on, to look at ideas from other teams, see that front wing, see this side pod idea or whatever the case is, see that little winglet on the front of the floorboard, and then run it up with a similar idea on the Aston Martin with a car that's so versatile that it's not going to throw off the whole of the rest of the aerodynamics. So that was one of the key quotes. This, however, was the other key quote. It's all the way at the bottom of the article. The AMR26 that races in Melbourne is going to be very different from the one that people saw at the Barcelona shakedown. And the AMR26 that we finished the season with is going to be very different to the one that we start the season with. So this will be true with all teams to an extent. But we understand that, for example, a team like McLaren, they've said the car they showed us in Barcelona is pretty close to the car that they're going to have in Melbourne for the start of the season. But Adrian Newey is saying, no, that car you saw, boys, that's only scratching the surface, right? We're only just getting started with some of the developments on the Aston Martin this season. It does make you wonder whether Honda and the power unit is going to be the key performance differentiator, because these cars up and down the grid are also very different. I think that's another great thing. The liveries are quite stand out this season, but also, if you look up and down the cars that they've shown us, I know that there will be convergence, of course, to certain solutions, but clearly in this era of regulations, there are still many different interpretations, and we are seeing a very different interpretation, of course, with the Aston Martin. But this car is going to change significantly, and as we understand, there will be a far more radical, extreme version. Newey says, is it really aggressive? Not necessarily. But when the season starts, and certainly when the season ends, I'm sure that they will get down that similar route. So, look, the car that races in Melbourne is going to be very different to the one that people saw at the shakedown. And this car was spectacular enough, right, I thought. So when we see it with what's going to be a more extreme and more developed solution, I'm sure that the front wing is going to be very interesting. They didn't really show us anything on that in Barcelona. I'm sure that there will be some more interesting features there. Yeah, very excited to see what they come out with next. Newey does seem pretty happy with his developments, and whether it will be enough to be a competitive force this season, that's a question that really nobody has the answer to right now. They feel like an absolute wild card this year, but I do believe that a lot of their success or failure will come down to that power unit, but Newey and the team have clearly packaged it very well. The final thing to mention is on Ocon. He had a few things to say. Firstly, he said that he'd never experienced speed like these cars. The torque delivery they have, the instant acceleration from the electrical side. He says, I've never experienced anything like it. The battery doesn't last the whole lap, so you've got to manage to throttle and lift off to recharge it. But my first impression is that it'll be hard to overtake. And he apparently got to 350 kph. Now, speaking of that, he also said, I've been following a few cars. You seem to lose quite a bit of front load, a bit more maybe than before. So there was some analysis done in recent months on simulations, what it would look like in terms of dirty air. The conclusion is, it's probably worse than the ground effect era. And these cars are not very developed, and Ocon is already saying that you're losing more downforce than you did last year with cars that were at the extreme of the ground effect era. So, yes, dirty air is back, and it's back for good. I mean, it never left, let's be honest. Whether overtaking can be done with overtake mode, or whether the active aero will help in some regard, but obviously every car has that, or whether it's purely going to be electrical management which is going to allow overtaking, that's a very different question. But Ocon says it's going to be difficult to pass. I'm hoping it's going to be on the easier side. Time will only tell. But very much enjoy your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care. And I'll see you next time.